Schools are not meant to educate us, they are meant to enslave us. 12 plus years of mass compulsory education is not meant to produce a population of self-reliant, competent contributors. It is meant to produce a hive of consumers, made docile and obedient via a mountain of looming debt. After generations of a system fueled by workers running furiously on the treadmill of commerce, the outlook is grim and bleak. But this is not the end. What the social engineers don't want us to notice is there is nothing holding us onto the treadmill. All we have to do is step off, and this is their greatest fear. I know that thumbnail is a bit sensational, but it's not clickbait. I promise you that you can take a child and start at the kindergarten level and take them all the way through to high school and graduate in just 3 years. Today we're going to discuss the evil genius of mass compulsory education. And we're going to show you, we're going to all explore together, and we're going to expose some of the lies of the elites that have told us that there is no other way. But there is. Hi there, this is Sherry Hayes, the interesting mother of 15 children, and I've been homeschooling for over 36 years, and I'd like to share with you something today that will add to your life. So go ahead and, unload the dishwasher, wash the dishes, wash the clothes, fold the clothes, feed the chickens, whatever you need to do, and listen, because I'm mostly going to be talking while we dive into the good life in Jesus. So we have been talking in this series of podcasts, we've been talking about how mommies need to educate themselves so that we can make better choices when we are choosing our course of action for this upcoming year with our children. Because lots of us are ending up this year and we are just disgusted with what we're doing and we want to do something different, something more enthusing. But, most of us, when I started, I was very ignorant. Yes, quite ignorant. And so I had to educate myself. And it took a lot of years, and I've had enough experiences now to where I'm not afraid to try new things. And I see that there's great wisdom in those who have pulled away from conventional schooling. And one of those we've been talking about, first we've been talking about Charlotte Mason with Karen Andriola. Then we talked about Ruth Beechick and Dr. Raymond Moore. And today we are going to be pulling a lot from John Taylor Gatto, and we talked about him last time. We introduced him and his ideas. Today we're going to pull some more from that. Now originally I was going to make this into one huge podcast, and it just got longer and longer and longer, and it's taken me so long this week just to try to, it's like, if you have a bag of sugar and you have to put the sugar in a jar and you have a funnel. Well, I was trying to take all of that sugar thought and just kind of funnel it into my little tiny brain. And so the task was quite surmounting, let's say. All right. So anyway, I'm going to split this up into two. And then, I have another podcast after that planned on the genius of Western religion that got the way from Gatto's perspective, and I'll bring my own perspective into it. So I'm going to be taking all that into consideration for the next one. And then after that, because it's just so much information, I can't just share it really quick. And then I'm going to dive into then the unschooling thing that everybody's been talking about. Anyhow, for this one, I do use notes. So, and in these notes, I'm going to have quotes from different persons, and different interesting things to read to you. So I hope you don't mind. I'm going to read a little bit. Also, there's going to be a playlist link in the description below the video so that if you missed the other ones about the different people that we talked about, you can go back and review those. Okay, so first, to show you I'm not making up the idea that a basic high school education does not take 13 years, I want to share 2 quotes which I hope will shed light on the lies we've been conditioned to believe, and they are lies. Okay. First, I'm going to read from John Taylor Gatto. Children do not learn in school. They are babysat. It takes maybe 50 hours to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. After that, students can teach themselves. Mainly what school does is to keep the children off the streets and out of the job market. You've never heard that one before. 50 hours to teach the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then the kids teach themselves the rest. Just think about that for a minute. And we'll go into further some stuff about this. Okay. The next quote is going to be from Dr. Raymond Moore, which I talked about a few videos ago, or a few podcasts ago. Okay. When Dr. J.T. Fisher, later, quote, dean, unquote, of American psychiatrists, started school at 13, unable to read or write, and graduated from a Boston high school at 16, he thought he was a genius, until he found that any normal, quote unquote, child could do the same. So this fella, okay, he could not read or write, but he was 13 and he entered into Boston High School and he graduated at 16. Yes, and this was at a time then they were pretty strenuous in those schools. It wasn't quite like the dumbed down requirements we have these days. Okay, here's another quote from Dr. Moore's book, the Successful Handbook, the Successful Homeschool Family Handbook. Okay. All of the learning necessary for success in high school can be accomplished in only 2 or 3 years of formal skill study. Delaying mandatory instruction in the basic skills until the junior high years could mean academic success for millions of school children who are doomed to failure under the traditional school system. And that's from William Rower, pediatrician specialist at Berkeley. Okay. Now, what he's talking about is before you enter high school, you only need 2 or 3 years worth of work, and then you can graduate from high school easily. So it's a little different than only 2 to 3 years, but it kind of has the same idea. Now, I want to read you a quote from that Successful Homeschool Family Handbook that I think you'll find quite interesting. Okay, here it is. 50 years ago, and that would be in the 1940s, according to the publisher of this book, in one of the most remarkable studies ever made, Carnegie, the Progressive Education Association, and others spent $4 million to find which children learned more, those who were taught by teachers or those who were left to develop and learn for themselves. This 8-year study reported findings many educators prefer to ignore. So you can imagine what kind of outcomes they found. Researchers compared 1,500 children who were taught in conventional elementary school classrooms and 1,500 who learned in very flexible situations or who were not taught at all, where adults were available only to answer questions or help the children find materials or information. The children were paired by age, sex, social background, aptitude test scores, vocational interests, etc. They were followed through high school and college for over 8 years. So that seems like it's pretty broad, doesn't it? Okay. The results astounded the researchers and study sponsors. On every variable, on every parameter, including their grades in high school and college, academic honors, leadership capacity, and even attitude on the job, the children from the flexible classes outperformed those in the conventional, pressured classrooms. But the children who were not formally taught at all, think about it, had the highest scores of all in all areas measured. Now, you can understand why they wanted to bury this study. They don't want you to know about this, do they? Interesting. Now, I know we've been taught to believe, we've been conditioned to believe that we have to have someone telling the whole population what to do. We have to have some form of control or things will tend to chaos. And I see it. When we are left to the rule of our own capricious passions, things can tend to chaos, can't they? And all the filth and disease which accompanies it is in our minds, right? And whatever else it is, top-down control does bring order, okay? I have been told the iron fist of communism or Nazism or whatever it was, whatever type of tyranny, brings the type of order that takes crime off the streets, right? But then it just transfers it from the criminal element in the population to the government and the police. Okay. Now, I had friends. I had people who taught me to speak a different language when I was in military intelligence in the Army way back during the Cold War. And they said they had kind of a joke in their country. And what it was is that in America, we would say, help, police, so if we needed help, we were in an emergency situation, we would call for the police. But where they were in their country, they would say, police, help. So the police were the criminals. Yeah, anyway, you get it. All right. I think this is what irks us when we hear about unschooling. In our minds, a population without schooling breaks down our entire social structure until we have anarchical pandemonium. However, in reality, it doesn't have to be either or. You don't have to have either tyranny or anarchy. There is a middle place that is beneficial to everyone. Now, we wouldn't believe this, except that we have experienced the American experiment, right? As you may recall, last podcast, we discussed Prussian schooling and its purpose as creating cannon fodder. This is because of the way wars were fought back then. Each side would line up their soldiers facing each other, and then they would volley, shots. Just fire shots at each other, and the poor soldiers just had to stand there, stout and brave, while they were being shot at. They couldn't go behind a tree or zigzag or anything, right? And so in order to create those kinds of soldiers, you had to condition them. Well, I'm standing here because I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to stand here and die for my country. My commander says to me to do this. Well, actually, they probably weren't dying for the country. They were just doing it because it was their duty. I mean, lots of times they were fighting other people's wars. Think about the Hessians that came to the United States to fight on the side of the British. They didn't care if they won or not. They were just being paid, right? And so they, in order to volunteer, in order to be part of an army that wasn't fighting for anything they cared about, but to be willing to stand there and take bullets like that, you had to have some people that were pretty brainwashed, just saying. Okay. Now in America, things are a little bit different. I mean, there were battles that we fought in the same way. But a lot of the wars and the different skirmishes we won were like when guys were standing from behind a tree with their buckskin on and their little powder horn, and they were just shooting at the redcoats who were standing there in their red and white uniforms. Okay. The difference was made quite clear when George Washington was sent out with General Braddock during the French and Indian War. If you recall, that was the time when we were on the side of the British and we were fighting the French and the Indians on the frontier primarily. Now, Washington and Braddock went out and they were going to fight a group of French and Indians along the Monongahela River, where, coincidentally, John Taylor Gatto is from that area. Interesting, right? Okay, so Braddock insisted on using European tactics, and Washington tried to warn him that the people they were fighting didn't ascribe to those same tactics. So the results were disastrous, but the British did not learn from the experience. Now, it resulted in Braddock being fatally wounded. They went on with the same tactics in their fight against the Americans in the Revolutionary War, right? And they were eventually subdued, and we're talking some of the best trained forces of the world at the time, by a body of men who were pulled straight out of cornfields and were reduced to wearing rags on their feet in lieu of boots. That's how bad things were in the Continental Army, yet we won that war. Now, we know a lot of it is providence, but it's partly because the British were so well schooled. Okay. Now, on our side, these men were free to think, but they were also under command. What kept them under that command was not coercion, well, mostly not coercion, but the burning desire to preserve their lives and their homes and their freedom from the British. Now, this very idea, the thinking soldier, went contrary to European theory, but it was the very heart of the American spirit. This spirit is exactly what schooling, along with the control of the press and the media, has been purposely seeking to destroy. And they've been doing a pretty good job of it too. I don't think I need to list here the horrors of modern public schooling. The headlines of the deterioration of classrooms and hallways are so commonplace, they are no longer shocking. As I said in my last post, I believe I could make a pretty good case that the breakdown our society has experienced, especially in the last 5 years, has been due to a methodical steeping in Prussian schooling where individual worth and purpose has been replaced by obedience training. Think about it. In 2020, the entire population of the land of the free and the home of the brave imprisoned and muzzled itself. What more clear evidence of a people who have been conditioned to follow blindly could we find? This would not have been possible in the early years of our republic. This could not have occurred without mass compulsory education. If John Taylor Gatto had been alive during that time, he would have been making this very point I'm making now. But he left us in 2018, just 2 years before this watershed event. I think it's important to iterate my motives here. At the beginning of my posts, I claim to have been homeschooling for 36 years. When I began back in 1989, I knew innately there was something terribly wrong with the school system, but I couldn't articulate it. I honestly thought I could make a change in my children's lives by bringing them home and following the conventional scope and sequence while adding in some Bible learning and prayer, and I thought that would be enough. As I progressed further and educated myself, I found the evil was not only in the content, but in the method. And this is something that is totally missing from all the rhetoric that you hear in all the news and all the politicians. They're missing the evil in the method. It's not just the curriculum, it's the method that is wrong. Okay, I'm sorry, that is just a huge point to me. Those who desire both money and power have moved us from our initial freedoms and reconstructed our nation with a consumer economy. This change made it possible for those at the top to take control via the subjugation of the workers via social conditioning. It's the same mindset as the Prussian dictators, but this time they are not in need of cannon fodder, but cattle, who will docilely saunter into the chutes where they will be cleaned, milked, and even slaughtered to feed the machine of mass industry. In this brave new world, the pillars of our republic have been obliterated. More on this in the next video or two. Suffice it to say that children in public schools, as well as their private and homeschool imitators, are not considered persons at all. But we know they are victims of a number of damaging social manipulations. Conventional education perniciously attacks its victims on 2 fronts simultaneously. It uses a soul-numbing curriculum enforced by soul-numbing tactics. So, while we Christian parents are courageously bringing our children home so they can be sheltered from the attacks of the godless worldview, which we all believe is very important, we are unwittingly continuing the oppression of the system via method. Now, this is taking advantage of our natural Christian understanding that work is a good thing and that we need to be under authority. They are both good things, but it's been conflated. It's been taken and manipulated so that guilt is used against us, the wrong kind of guilt, all right? This is what I consider my mission, to bring you, my wonderful listener, full circle, so that you and your family can be free of the schooling agenda. What we really need to understand here is why we've been conditioned to believe that it takes 13 years to get a good basic education. This is what John Gatto has to say. In the economy we have allowed to evolve, the real political dilemma everywhere is keeping people occupied. Jobs have to be invented by government agencies and corporations. Both employ millions and millions of people for which they have no real use. It's an inside secret among top echelon management that should you need to cause a rise in stock value, this can be engineered by eliminating thousands of, quote, useless, unquote, jobs. That is done regularly, and I would presume cynically. Young men and women during their brightest, most energetic years are kept from working or from being a part of the general society. This is done to keep them from aggravating this delicate work situation, either by working too eagerly, as kids are prone to do, or by inventing their own work, which could cause shocks throughout the economy. This violation of the injunction to work, which Western spirituality imposed, has backed us into a corner from which no authority has any idea how to extricate us. We cannot afford to let too many children really learn to work, as Amish children do, for fear they will discover its great secret. Work isn't a curse, but salvation. Now I want to explain how this could work out in practicality. First of all, schooling, and by that I mean close bookwork, should be delayed until at least 8 or 9 years old. There is so much empirical evidence to support this. I know this will shock you, but some suggest things should be put off until the age of 12. Then there is the, quote, course of study, unquote. First of all, we would want a student to learn the basics, and Gatto is spot on with his assessment that this only takes 50 instructional hours. How do I know this? Because of what the U.S. Army did to draftees during World War II. Now this is interesting, and you've never heard this before. I discovered this in an old 1950s high school reader. They had a story about this in there, and it intrigued me so much. A neighbor of ours said, "Oh, you guys do homeschooling," and they just handed us this box of old school books, and this one reader was in there, and it was just enthusing. I just had so much fun reading. Okay, anyway. At the beginning of the war, a certain amount of draftees were put out of consideration due to illiteracy. But the numbers were low enough that they weren't concerning, because they had enough people to draw from. But as the war went on, it was realized that every soldier counted, so literacy schools were created. In the span of just 6 weeks, soldiers, of which 55% could not read or write at all, were brought up to the 4th grade level. 6 weeks is all it took to bring soldiers who could not read or write at all up to the 4th grade level. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? During the Korean and Vietnam Wars, these schools were honed so that the curriculum became job specific. So they learned to read and write specifically for whatever job they were going to do. And then the effectiveness of the schools rose even higher. Okay. As for math, an interesting study was done by a man by the name of L.P. Benezet. I think it's Benezet, could be Benezet. Here is an excerpt from his book, The Teaching of Arithmetic 1, The Story of an Experiment. Now, this information I got from denisegaskins.com, so you might want to check her site out. It's really interesting. Okay, but this is in his words. In the fall of 1929, I made up my mind to try the experiment of abandoning all formal instruction in arithmetic below the 7th grade and concentrating on teaching the children to read, to reason, and to recite. My new 3 R's. And by reciting, I did not mean giving back verbatim the words of the teacher or of the textbook. I meant speaking the English language. The children in these rooms were encouraged to do a great deal of oral composition. They reported on books that they had read, on incidents which they had seen, on visits that they had made. They told the stories of movies. They told the stories of movies that they had attended, and they made up romances on the spur of the moment. It was refreshing to go into one of these rooms. A happy and joyous spirit pervaded them. The children were no longer under the restraint of learning multiplication tables or struggling with long division. They were thoroughly enjoying their hours at school. One of our high school teachers was working for her master's degree at Boston University, and as part of her work, he assigned her the task of giving tests in arithmetic to 200 sixth grade children in the Manchester schools. They were divided fairly evenly, 98 from experimental rooms and 102 from the traditional groups, or something like that. These were all sixth graders. Half of them had had no arithmetic until beginning the sixth grade, and the other half had had it throughout the course, beginning with the 3A. I'm not sure what that means. Okay. In the earlier tests, the traditionally trained people excelled, as was to be expected, for the tests involved not reasoning but simply the manipulation of the 4 fundamental processes. By the middle of April, however, all the classes were practically on a par. And when the last test was given in June, it was one of the experimental groups that led the city. In other words, these children, by avoiding the early drill on combinations, tables, and that sort of thing, had been able, in 1 year, to attain the level of accomplishment which the traditionally taught children had reached after 3½ years of arithmetical drill. Pretty enlightening information. Why haven't you ever been told about this stuff? Who benefits if you never hear about it? I think you know the answer. We better stop here, or this post is going to go on forever, and I don't have the time for it, and neither do you. Now, I've got plenty more to say. And as I said before, I'm going to make sure that in the next podcast, I'm going to have lots of stories. And I love to hear a good story, don't you? I'll even share some personal stories of people that I know that you would love to hear about. So if you'll stay tuned for the next podcast, I think you'll find some very interesting information. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.